sitting straight. Yes. And
Or
I think
like take
this
these
is
out as
good.
well.
I think this is good. And if there's a problem, I'll let you know. But I think this sounds great and we could begin anytime.
Okay, well, I want to introduce well, very briefly, BICAR. I think some of you here know BICAR, the Bombay Institute for Critical Analysis and Research. We founded ourselves effectively a few years ago now. It's been about 3.5 or 4 years ago, conceptually, in Bombay, to try not to try and reinvent the wheel, right, of what exists in current humanities and social sciences curricula in universities. They do that hopefully as well as they can. You know, I know that they're under a lot of pressure with regards to funding the world around, not just in Bombay and Beirut, in a variety of places, but in the UK, in Europe, in the rest of the world, in America certainly, you know, where fees have intensified massively for education. So nevertheless, I think that there's an effort on the part certainly of our colleagues and Rico, myself, and our other colleagues at BICAR, you know, who work with these institutions, you know, are trying our best to work within them. But the idea of BICAR was to found a space that would again fill in some of the gaps that started to emerge quite intensely, especially after the official, you know, sort of defeat of communism in 1989, capital's sort of planetary defeat of the very idea or hypothesis of communism, of something, an alternative to free markets, to parliamentary democracy, as the way of being part of a political community. We've seen some of the devastating effects of the parliamentary democratic model, I think, certainly in the UK, certainly in India, certainly in the US, certainly in the Middle East. So our effort was to try and not repeat what is already being done or what has already been done in mainstream academia, or in what's sometimes called university discourse, right? What the discourse of the university is, which is supposed to be a corrective on the everyday politics, or a cautionary, a monetary form of advice of sorts to how policy might be shaped, how we might think, how students should think, how citizens might act or vote. You know, the university was supposed to be this fundament, and there's a lot that's very, very, very good, I think, that persists in the university, but it's just being cut systematically every day. So we place ourselves in what's called a para-academic space, which is not, again, like a transcendental space where we are better than, you know, the existing world educational spaces, nor are we subaltern or like an activist organization. We just are literally para or parallax to what exists. So it's not claiming to exist in some sort of how we teach, how we you know, sort of decide what programs we're going to do. It's not about existing above or below anything. It's about existing through a parallax view. Again, just seeing gaps in the surface of education, of thinking, of making, you know, art, film, you know, writing. You know, we spend a lot of time on writing, and this is because these are things that have fallen by the wayside. Again, not to blame existing university discourse, but just because they're really under a lot of pressure, and they have been in neoliberalism. So that's sort of the loose motivation of having started BICAR in Bombay, and we've had. I recognize some names here. There are fortunately several of you here. A lot, you know, a lot of wonderful students have come through so far in the past 3.5 years, and we're sure many more will come. It's with absolute great pleasure that you know our first step toward finally expanding and introducing a new department. We've dabbled, as some of you know, some of you might not know, we've dabbled as rigorously as we possibly could with the visual arts, with some sound, with both moving images as well as still images. But we so far, BICAR in Bombay has basically been largely about political philosophy, philosophy theory, and largely from a psychoanalytic, Marxian psychoanalytic perspective. Most of our courses have been in that line. Then, of course, we have our formal writing program, which is also informed by that philosophy, but is a very different ballgame. We wanted to take the arts seriously, really seriously, because we've seen a crisis in the arts, and this is where Rico Franses, who will be presenting the new department to you, and then we'll have a conversation, an open conversation, became sort of the natural choice, to help me sort of pilot this very experimental ship, right? One of the things, especially being situated, and this is going to sound a bit weird because our inaugural course, which Rico will be teaching in the department, is on Manet, right, and the upheavals of modernity. One of the things that we've really tried to correct is sort of the sort of rat race of the art world that has come to occupy at BICAR, that has come to occupy a lot of the so-called global South. So we're situated in Bombay, as many of you know. We do work in the Middle East and North Africa, in the Gulf. Now, after the pandemic, many of our students are from not just West Asia, but also East Asia, from Japan, from Vietnam, also from the Philippines, from Indonesia. We have lots of students from Europe and from the Americas as well, in our programs. And so what we've tried to do is with introducing this new program, and I want you all to pay very, very specific attention to what Rico is going to be talking about today, just in presenting the new department, is the notion of a critical analysis, right, of art, what that means, right? It's not just, nowadays, I see this word critical being thrown around a lot. I don't really like it, like a lot of words, that get thrown, curating, right, gets thrown around a lot, right? To the power, gets thrown around a lot, like power, identity gets thrown around a lot, neoliberalism. These words get thrown around a lot, and the lack of specificity of our usage of language, right? Within academe, within our contemporary arts world, has, I think, done a tremendous disservice, to the way that we think, talk, engage, view, and make art, right? So this department is very much a call to a strong specificity to what criticality means vis-a-vis the art, that Rico is going to talk about, and then we'll all talk about together, I hope, today. What does it mean to think critically about art? What does it mean to make art critically? What does it mean to view art critically? What does it mean to write about art critically? This is the raison d'etre, the reason of being for this department, that will be extraordinarily exciting. I promise you all, with Rico in particular at its head. I don't have to, I don't think, sort of rehearse Rico's accolades and his view, because part of what we are also up to is not about sort of name dropping or navigating through this very Kafkaesque contemporary of the arts and philosophy, and ideation and viewing and seeing and being, through anchoring ourselves in degrees, in professionalization, etc., etc. Part of it is just about thinking. I mean, when Rico first proposed the idea of inaugurating the department with a course of his, which I'm very thankful for, through saying, I don't want to prescribe any reading. I was just like, because I just want to, like, we're going to be looking, and that's a very difficult thing to teach how to see, without the crutch of the written text. And in an hour of thinking, I was completely sold on it, and I think this is what we need. We tend to think that what we need, I think, in this contemporary art world and contemporary philosophy is jargon, is using phrases like blurring the lines between fact and fiction, for anything, or which I just read and hear constantly. It doesn't stop. But the goal of the department is not to produce automatons or robots. It's to rejuvenate a critical thinking about art that we at BICAR think has unfortunately died in our contemporary sort of late capitalist world. There used to be tremendous debates, pugilistic debates between Harold Rosenberg, Clement Greenberg, Arthur Danto, Duchamp, Bob Rauschenberg, Jasper John, Cy Twombly, the progressive artist movement in Bombay, Etel Adnan. There used to be the early, Walid Sadek, the early sort of, late 1980s, early 1990s artists, the truly conceptual artists. The stakes were very high about what an artwork would look like, right? And those stakes have died, we think, and our effort is to try and reanimate that sort of undead with the introduction of this new department. And so, without further ado, I want to much more clearly and with visuals. I want to pass this over to my dear friend and colleague Rico Franses, to introduce our department and to flesh this out a bit more.
All right, thanks, Rohit. Thank you indeed for that really interesting overview of what you're doing at BICAR. I'm going to do a little visual presentation, and so what I think I won't say much before, but let's look at the presentation, and then we can come back and sort of look at the once I've kind of articulated what the stakes are in terms of art, in terms of visuality. Let's come back and think about the relation to criticality and critical thinking. I will say, just at the get-go, critical thinking in relation to art is a little bit different than critical thinking in relation to what we usually think of. Critical thinking is usually, it's associated with thinking, right? We always say critical thinking in some way, and it's always textual and philosophical and verbal. And I'm all for that. That's also great. But I also think there's something else that happens in parallel, as you're saying, like the parallax view, right? Between what happens in art and visuality. That's not quite the same thing, although there's, of course, really interesting kind of overlaps between them. So I'm just going to start with a little visual presentation, and then we will we'll come back to a larger discussion about what these issues are. So let me just set this in motion here. So when I teach art, so when I step into the classroom, there's always one big obstacle to overcome. And that is this idea, especially in relation to modern art, that almost everybody has, especially people who love art, especially people who join my classes and really like art. And they have this idea that art is some kind of, it comes from deep inside the soul and the psyche, and it just gets kind of imprinted in a sense. The best art just kind of emerges in this kind of paroxysm almost, in this kind of explosion, and then it's bang, it's on the canvas. And I have great difficulty getting around that way of thinking. Now, I'm just going to give you an example of that. And the best example of that is the artist Van Gogh, the general approaches to Van Gogh. So I'm just let's try the screen sharing over here. And I'm going to put up a picture. Okay, let me know when that comes through, when you can see that.
Yes, it's there, Rico.
Okay, so this is a famous painting by the artist Vincent van Gogh. Now, I'm at a slight disadvantage as I'm talking to everybody here because I have no idea how much you know about art, right? You may all be incredible experts in art. You may know absolutely nothing about it. I can assure you my main goal in life, in a sense, is to start with people who know absolutely nothing. So I won't presume too much. So this is a famous painting called Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. And, it's an unusual picture. If you're used to photographs or if you're used to, standard realistic representations, there's all kinds of strange things happening. I hope you can see my cursor as I'm going to fiddle this around over here. For example, did you know that there is a tree over there? You can actually see a tree. Strangely enough, people find that a little bit difficult to see, but you can sort of more or less make out this kind of cosmic whirling over here. Now, the thing about Vincent, as many of you may well know, is that he had some fairly profound mental problems. At one stage, he was institutionalized. He committed suicide. He had all kinds of problems. And I tell you, I have yet to see anything written about any one of Vincent's paintings that does not mention his mental problems. Interestingly enough, those of you who may be old enough, there's a famous song from the late 1970s called Starry, Starry Night by Don McLean. And he talks about, the artist's mental instability. And so it's difficult, once you say mentally unstable, you look at this and like, oh, that's why it looks so weird. That's why it looks a little bit strange, is because of these, mental problems that he had, these internal psychic problems that he had. Now, I'll tell you what the problem with this point of view is. And if you'll allow me just to take a little detour. So I was trained in philosophy. I did my undergraduate degree in philosophy. And when we studied philosophy, let's say we studied, Plato or Aristotle or Derrida or something like that. When you study philosophy, you study what the person wrote, right? You take a text and you interrogate the text. You read about it, you think about it. Is it right or is it wrong? And you're really interested in what they say. So the principle in philosophy is a thinker produces a work and we read it to find out what it says. Now, to come back to art history, it doesn't work that way, right? What I just told you about this little story about Vincent van Gogh, right? What we tend to say with art history is an artist produces a work. And then instead of asking what does it say, we say, how does it express what he feels? Well, he had a rough childhood, he was mentally disturbed, or he committed suicide, or whatever it is. But my point is, when you say that about an artwork, it's like saying, when you read a text by Plato, and instead of engaging with what he's saying or his theories, you say, oh, that's because, just to give you an example. So Plato has this theory of ideal forms, right? And let's say I read Plato on ideal forms, and then I say, the reason that he said that is because he had an unhappy marriage and his wife left him. And so then he was really miserable. So then he invented this idea of ideal forms, right? Now, obviously, in philosophical terms, that makes absolutely no sense, right? That's completely besides the point. I have no idea what Plato's sex life was like, right? Could be an interesting movie to put on the side, Plato's sex life. But, you read the argument, you see what he says, and you engage with the argument. And so if you give this kind of personal reading, you're missing the point, in a sense, right? Isn't the more interesting question, what's he saying? Rather than trying to find psychological reasons behind it. I'll give you another philosophical example. Say Derrida, right? So Derrida talks about a world that somehow everything's in flux, right? It's quite difficult to pin anything down. Whatever Derrida looks at, it's always, there are always 1,000 other things that are going on and moving around. And then I said, well, okay, Derrida, he was Jewish. He was born Jewish in Morocco, unstable, then left for France. His life was unstable. So that's why his philosophy is unstable. Again, that doesn't make any sense. That's not what Derrida is about. And I'm saying the same kind of problem is at stake when you say, oh, you look at a painting, oh, and it's because of psychological reasons. Now, you may be saying to yourself, oh, I never make that mistake. But believe me, you do and you will. Everybody falls into that trap. I myself still fall into that trap. So what I'm trying to get at here is my core argument is that a work of art is like a philosopher's text. Almost always, not 100%, but almost always, it says something. And our job is to learn to read what it's saying. Let me give you an example. A second. Oh. Here we go. All right, so this is a painting by Vermeer, a Dutch 17th century artist. And here you can see the artist. First of all, you can see it's a beautiful room, right? Really beautifully painted and very sort of fancy. This is not a poor place. It's quite a fancy, not quite a castle, but it's quite a nice place. Look at this beautiful tiling on the floor over here, a wall hanging over there, people nicely dressed. And then when you look closely, you can see that this over here is a portrait, a self-portrait from behind. And this is an artist. You can see that's the easel, that's the canvas over there. And the artist is painting something. And what he's painting is this over here. So here's the model, and here he is painting this over here. And so you look at this and you think, oh, you know, first of all, it's a beautiful painting, right? And it's very, very accurately, very accurately painted. And you're looking at it and you're saying, that's really beautiful. But then let's look a little bit more closely. So now I've been saying an artwork tells you something, it says something. So what's this artist saying? What's this artwork saying? And what it's saying is, can you see that what he's painting is this over here, right? He's painting this feathered headdress over there. But can you also see that what we see of the headdress is not what he's painting of the headdress? He's painting his view of the headdress, which comes in at this angle over here, which is different from our view, which comes in from this point over here. So what's Vermeer saying? What he's saying is, and this should usually take us a half an hour of analysis, but I'm rushing through this quickly. What he's saying is, I am painting incredibly realistic. Everything, and what he's saying is, because I am demonstrating to you how accurately I can paint, you should also understand that everything else in this painting has been done with that same attention to detail and that same capacity that I have for being able to paint. So what he's saying over here, with this over here, he's not saying, look, it's a beautiful thing. What he's saying is, I can do this. This is my skill, this is my work. This is how accurately I can paint when I really turn my hand to it, right? So now that's the kind of detailed analysis that you have to do with these kind of paintings. Now I'm going to show you something else. This is a painting by Picasso from the late 1920s. And I hope as you're looking at it, that you are as confused by it as I was when I first saw it yesterday. Now, bearing in mind that I've spent, more than a lifetime looking at this stuff, and I'm an expert at Picasso. And when I first looked at this, I still had no idea what I was looking at. But what it is, and I'm going to talk you through this, this is sort of subtitled An Artist and His Model. And probably the easiest thing to see, can you see there are two heads there? There's another head there. But can you see over here, there is like the artist's palette, right? That's the thing that you hold in your hand that has the different pieces of paint, the little different colors of art on it, excuse me, not art, different pieces of paint on it that you then dab your paintbrush in. And you can see that's the paintbrush, that's his hand over there, that he will then be painting on. So this is the artist over here, pretty much. And can you see this is kind of his leg there, sort of like he's sitting and he's got his legs down. And what's he painting? He's painting a model. And where is the model? Well, let's start. Can you see the most easy things to see here are, there's one hand and there's another hand. So two tiny little hands. And that is a neck and that is a head over there. And so what you're looking at, can you see, is this is a model who's reclining on a bed. So he's turned this around, right? This should be rotated through 90 degrees to be flattened down this way, but the bed is kind of up on the side and he's looking at the model over here. And then it's very difficult to make out. This might be part of the body, but the one thing that you can see is the toes and a foot over here. So you have to imagine that he's sitting at the foot of the bed and the artist, the model is in this direction, going in this direction over here. So that's her head. This is her body over here. and this is the foot over here. I hope this is beginning to make sense visually. All the rest is very difficult to tell what's going on. But what is Picasso saying with this, right? Now, there's, of course, lots more to see about this, but what is Picasso saying? And I think what he's saying is, you think that's what happens between an artist and a model? No, no, no. Let me tell you. This is what happens between an artist and a model. Look at all of these lines of interconnection that run here where you cannot tell the difference between the artist and the model. The process of looking at the model, he says, is one of this kind of imbrication where we not quite become one, where we are completely kind of involved with each other. And the only way I can paint, he says, is for this kind of intense, emotion isn't quite the right word, but it's right, this intense kind of physical interaction and interlocking between the artist and their model. And then he also, because he's also really thinking about this, so this, now nothing's been written about this as far as I can tell, right? But there's this one head over here, and it looks like it's the same, it looks like he's showing you two things. So he's kind of showing you, this is what I look like. I'm the artist, big smile on my face. But this is what I'm feeling. Look at what the sight of the model is doing to my face. And then look at that incredibly intense eyes, right? His head is spinning, he's all in a tiz. This stuff is happening all around him. This kind of crazy energy stuff is happening all around him. And that's what he's doing as he's painting. Right? So that's, in a sense, just in another 3 minutes, what this painting is saying. It's saying, this is what happens between an artist and a model. And he's also saying, because he knows his art history really well, he's also saying, Vermeer's telling you this is what happens between an artist and their model. But I'm telling you, this is what really happens between an artist and their model. And so now, just to come back, can you see, in a sense, and this is my argument about philosophy and a theory, can you see that Vermeer is giving you one theory about what painting is, and one theory about this kind of cool, dispassionate view between an artist and the model. And Picasso is giving you another completely different view about what happens between an artist and a model. They're two completely different views. Can you also see, though, and I'm going to show you this next painting, excuse me. This over here is another Picasso painting. And over here, in a funny way, he's showing the outfit and the curls. This is very much like someone from the age of Vermeer would have been dressed. They have this kind of lace collar, they have this wig, this curly hair. And what he's saying is, so he's an artist in his model, and he's saying, look, so there's the model relatively neutral over there, and look at that crazy face. Right? It's like, oh my God, this is what happens when I look at a model, right? As opposed to this is a close-up here. This is what I meant to show you, this close-up of that over there. So these are various ways of these different theories about what's involved when you paint and what's involved when you look. Each of them is giving you a theory, right? By the way, I think when Picasso is saying, I'm telling you, this is the truth of what happens, I just want to go back to this. Vermeer, for all the accuracy of his painting, is telling you a fantastic lie in this painting, right? Anyone who's done any painting in a beautiful, clean room, in your favorite velvet clothes, you're going to start painting a model? I don't think so. This is not what Vermeer's looked like, I promise you, right? This is a whole, this is this whole lie, but it's first of all, the fact that it's a lie is what makes it a theory. He's not saying this is what happens. He's just saying this is what might be. This is what it would look like in a particular way in which, if I paint things accurately, this is what I can do. So this is what makes it a theory. Just like that is what makes it a theory. Now, I just want to say, so the first point about, just to come back to this, the first point about a critical analysis of art. Philosophy says, so come back to philosophy, right, which is what I'm claiming the status for these works of art, right? Philosophy says, what does a work say in all its complexity? But art history, conventional art history, doesn't say that. It says, why did he do this painting? Well, he did it because, he was a sexist, or his sex drive was too strong, or, some kind of psychological reason. But can you see how as soon as you say that about Picasso, or even about Vermeer, you're getting away from the painting and you're getting away from the work. Now we're talking about the artist and their psychology, not about the work. But to be honest, the work is much more interesting than the person, right? The person is just gossip. So my credo, the first thing that I always start off with is stick to the text. The text is where all the work is being done. And so then again, the first job of a critical analysis of art, in this sense, I want to say, is to treat art like philosophy. That's the first claim. And in all the courses we do, in everything we do, that will always be our first proposition. Art is not just an expression. It's not pretty. It's not there for whatever reasons. It's there as a text to be read and to be understood. Excuse me. So that's the first point, the first step. But the second point about this is even that what I'm saying, treat these as a philosophy, doesn't make for a critical analysis of art. The next step is you have to take that theory seriously and engage with it as a theory. In other words, you have to do theory with it. Ask if it's true. Ask Picasso versus Vermeer, which one is truer? Have a look at this through the lens of phenomenology. What's my engagement with the world? What's my engagement in terms of bodily boundaries? What does looking do in relation to my bodily boundaries, right? These are all questions that are posed by the images themselves. So again, not what was it, not why was it done, right? When you say why was it done, it says, oh, here's the painting as an endpoint, and we're looking what went behind the painting, what came before the painting. What I'm saying is, let's look at it the other way. Let's start with the painting and then see what theory is the painting propounding. Now, funnily enough, you might think that I'm complaining about art historians who don't treat art as philosophy, but I'm also going to blame out philosophers who don't treat art like philosophy. Very few people take art seriously in this particular way, as being about ideas. It's not just about this raw spilling of emotions onto the canvas, as though that would even be possible. Now, once you start doing this, you will see how quickly the theories multiply and the questions around them. If you're a good artist, you can do all of this theoretical stuff, right? And you will also see how quickly, as I'm just giving you an indication here, of how this all spreads out into questions of, say, into the questions that verbal theory deals with: deconstruction, phenomenology, psychoanalysis, all there. Psychoanalysis, not in terms of psychoanalyzing the artist, but in terms of psychic structures that show up again and again in terms of images. And the other point about this is, art is always social, right? Art is always social, and it's always about people, even when there are no people on the canvas. So art is always social theory and philosophy. And so it links up in that way, just to come back to BICAR, it links up with BICAR in that sense, right? Because of this kind of social aspect and this interrogation of what sociality is in relation to us as people. But it also adds something new, something that verbal theory quite often doesn't get at, and that's about the nature of visuality. Not much, as I say, not, phenomenology, I love phenomenology, but phenomenology is a baby when it comes to dealing with your interactions with the environment in relation to visual art. Visual art was there, centuries, millennia was interested in that question before phenomenology got up and going. It's all about how the world is built and made and experienced. That's sort of what a critical analysis of art is about. Now, I'll just add, we will also sometimes do verbal theory, for example, philosophy, as I've just been saying, psychoanalysis, phenomenology, various things like that. But I will sometimes be doing that. But the point that I want to stress is each image that we look at is already a theory. So you don't necessarily need another theory to understand the theory. The thing is, just treat this like a theory. That's what I was saying to Rohit. Let's not put any readings in, right? Let's treat this as the reading. Let's look at this and see what it says about the world. Sure, I'm not opposed to reading about things in any way, but in some ways, in some ways, the way theory works. If we say, for example, you say psychoanalysis in relation to sexuality. So sexuality is this thing that's this weird, strange thing, and then you need a theory to decipher it. And when you bring a theory to art, you kind of are saying in some ways, yeah, the art is the strange, weird thing, and we need a theory to decipher it. But in some ways, and I'm not opposed to that, and in some ways I think that's true. But what I'm also trying to make the case for is that if art is already a theory, we don't necessarily need another theory to understand it. The point is just understand the art and you've got the theory up and running. So that to me also is a huge part of what the critical analysis of art is all about. So I will pause over there and let's go back to Rohit and any further comments.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you, Rico, so much. That was, I'm so excited about this, it's, again, as I said, a huge set for BICAR, and I think you've demonstrated what we're doing that's different, I think, also, and not different for the sake of difference, which is two, but you've justified that difference. You've justified the fact that that we're going to be doing something a bit different because it's just something that nobody else is doing, which is actually treating text philosophically. I have two questions, and then we open it up, if that's okay. The sun is coming in Bombay, so let's show this. Great.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, is that better? Or that?
Yeah.
Okay. My first question is that I think so. I just taught with BICAR, Rico, like a class on film photography, on film and photography, right? And I taught, of course, I'm not you, which is why you are with us. I'm not somebody who spent time with images. Of course, I love to watch film. I love to see photography. I like to, but less so now. Nowadays, I like to I see certain openings or like art exhibits or whatnot. But in this, like, what students were having a difficult time with, I think, was okay. And I think you did this with you answered this question, but I wanted you to elucidate this more, right? Which is when I was trying to present something like Roland Barthes, let's say, theory of or idea of the punctum to a work, whether it's Vermeer's actually or Picasso's, right? That is a sort of singular universal, right? The notion of the punctum, which is, something that that disturbs the viewer, right? That in the very continuity of the work, but that is not necessarily on the surface. Right. When I was trying to present this idea, sorry, the sun is coming in quite intensely.
Yeah, indeed.
So I'll just hold this here. But we were trying to learn this idea of like, okay, so Rico, how do you see a theory? Let me put it simply, according to the language you've used. How do you see a theory in an image, right? How do you read an image that is not just subjective? That's what Rico said, or what, like, when your students are in class with you, that's like what student X has said, student Y has said, because that's not what you're saying at all. And I think you made this clear. That's what the heavy use of the word theory is. It's not like, okay, you look at this Picasso or you look at Vermeer, and whatever you feel, student, in our class in CAA, that is as valid as what somebody else what student Y says they feel. I see this, okay, Rico, you just see like a foot there, or a hand there, or but no, I don't see a foot. I see that foot as an amoeba, right? Like, so what prevents your approach to art history, which is what I love about your work, right? To art history, to what I think you've aptly, labeled this new department to be critical analysis of art, to not just be about some sort of postmodern subjectivity of what the spectator sees, right? What is the point of a class, right? With regards to seeing or viewing images. And that's much easier. I know this from academia as a philosopher, right? I mean, like in America, part of the reason why I left to start BICAR was that, like, it was so convenient. Students were willing, their parents were willing to pay like God knows how much money per year for them to study, and they want to just say their feelings about what they thought immediately on, like, and then I don't have to prepare for class as a teacher, right? I can just let them talk because that's what they want. That prevents me from having to field phone calls from parents saying, "Why are you paying $100,000 a year for a kid to go here if you're lecturing on the stuff?" And it's hard to resist, like, or the capitalist model of pedagogy does not allow. They're saying just go with it, let them say what they feel. It's easier for you, then you can spend more. You don't have to write a lecture before class. You don't have to prepare. You could just let them come into class with their pajamas on and say what they want about what they see in this Picasso image. Like, what is it about what you have to say as a teacher?
So actually, that's, it's funny because so actually that's quite an easy answer for me to give you, but I'll give you the kind of roundabout one to it, right? Which is what you're saying actually is the default mode in which people talk about abstract art. So, art from 100 years ago, people don't realize even that it's 100 years ago that abstract art showed up, right? And people are always saying, oh, because abstract art can be so difficult to work out, right? It doesn't give you its cues. So that sort of divides people. There's one half of people who say, oh, it's a lot of nonsense. Kids, my baby brother could do it. It's all about nonsense. And then the other half of people who are sort of defending it are saying, no, you don't understand. It's just about what you feel. It's all just subjective, right? So both of those answers, as far as I'm concerned, are wrong, right? But that's the default answer for so much modern art is, oh, well, no, it's not really about anything other than about what you feel. And of course, I disagree with that radically. And the short answer to that, well, actually, let me just come back to your point about the punctum and Barth, right? I've always been, I confess, it's been a long time since I read that, but I've always been a little bit, on the one hand, it's quite a forceful piece of writing. On the hand, he's a little bit vague, and he doesn't quite specify, right, whether the punctum is, it sort of reads, he's looking at pictures, and this is the picture of his mother, and it comes out. It is a subjective, right? In many ways.
But he does say that the picture, the Winter Garden picture, you haven't read it for a while, but I have the benefit of just having taught it.
Yeah, right. So tell me.
But he does, like, it's not about he does say it's subjective. Like, I don't think anyone else can look at this picture of my mother as a child in the Winter Garden. It's a messy text, right?
Yeah,
this is a very messy text. Camera lucida.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I don't think that obviously nobody else would want to look at this picture, because I'm looking at this picture because it's a picture of my mother as a child in a winter garden.
Yeah, exactly.
But what he does is justify the fact that he can see a punctum in that photo.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. All right.
And he's not saying I can see that my mother as a child I can see that in her now as my mother, when I met her.
Yeah.
This is as foreign of a picture to him as a photograph to him as it could be to anyone else. That's what I think is powerful about the book, is that it's not the common complaint will be, and I think this will be what happens. This happens in my classes at BICAR. This will happen in your classes at BICAR. This will happen in others who you have teaching in the CA department at BICAR, right? The critical analysis of art, right? They're going to say, "But this is just," and this is the nature of the contemporary art world. They love subjectivity, right? Everything footfall, they're putting art on buses to take to the poor to justify the goodness of the art. Poor people in Bombay, at least, are just can you get this bus out of the way?
Get this out of here. Yeah, exactly.
Clogging up traffic, so it's this subjectivity objectivity question that I think you've brought up.
Right.
With theory, this notion of theory is very important for you to communicate pedagogically.
Right. So let me just answer that. Oops. Oh, hang on a second. My battery's just disappeared. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? I'm still on. Okay.
You're audible.
All right, good. So that's the backup power. So I actually want to be Barthes is justifying that in some ways. I actually want to be even more rigorous. I think that if you look at a painting really, really carefully, so I don't really use the word punctum, right? But you might want to have the idea of Freud's navel of the dream, right? In some ways, which is the central key point in an image. And I think that if the artist is any good, that's structured into the image. So I think if you do a really careful analysis of what that's all about, but that really depends on how you're reading the picture, what's going on inside the picture. That takes a lot of time, and it's kind of like a formal analysis, right? But I think it's really in there. But the main point that I want to make to you is it's all about, now this you and I have discussed before, it's a matter of argument. You have to make the argument for it, right? It's not just, oh, I'm looking at it and that's what, so I'm looking at I hope you've got this on the screen, it's the Picasso painting. So as I'm looking at this painting, the thing that really is standing out for me here is this face, this weird face over here. I think that's really a kind of dimension from all the other, and a different modality from all the other things in the painting. Do I want to say that's a punctum? I'm not sure. Do I want to say that it's the core of the painting? That in some ways, it's the most important part. It's kind of like, when you reach your argument in text and you say, and this is my point. I think and this is my point, right? But it depends on, we don't have the time to do it, but I'll make the argument visually. And part of what these courses are all about, part of the pedagogy of this is, how do you get to analyze the image, look at the image really carefully, so that you can tell which parts go together, which parts don't go together, and which parts kind of stand out. This is the skill of the artist, right? It's like
or the critic or the art maker, or exactly. I totally agree with that. The crucial word of argument. It's like, what we're teaching, what you're teaching, what you've taught me, certainly is how to make an argument about, so you might not have thought about something in this painting. Obviously, nobody can think about
that's the essential point.
That it can be argued, right? It can be argued, as opposed to being, well, and affect goes into arguing, feeling goes into arguing, the feeling goes into, but it's not exhausted through feeling or affect. The argument cannot be exhausted through feeling or affect. It's feeling or affect. I feel this when I see this, but that feeling has to be argued so that others can relate to it. And that's exactly what you've taught. This is what you've taught me, and this is why I'm so excited about
that's
it.
Kind of so, and that's exactly right. So I'm looking at this, and this face here is really popping out to me, right? You may not have noticed. I'm going to make the argument to you. Then we're in class and somebody says, that's good, but honestly, the thing that's really standing out to me is that weird little head over there, right? So the point that you just said, I'm encouraging you in a sense, because art is so much about emotion anyway, right? So I'm encouraging you to go with your emotion and then say why. So your emotion gets you there. Now make the argument. You can't just stop there and say, oh, no. It's like, and this often happens in class, right? Somebody say, well, it's the head, and then I'll say why, and they say, well, I don't know. No, that's what the class is about, is to get beyond the I don't know. Is to think about how that operates in the context of all the other things, how that works, and it kind of all gets threaded together, so that all of a sudden I'm looking at it and I'll suddenly say, oh, wow, yeah, no, you're right. That's really standing out more to me than the other thing.
Exactly.
And this is the magic of art, right? Precisely, is the way in which it kind of shifts around in relation to the way you're thinking about it critically. If you're not thinking about it critically, you're not going into it enough, and you're just looking at it and you're saying, oh, that's a massive line. Yeah, all right, next painting, please.
Yeah.
But to me, that's part of what the criticality of the stuff is all about.
I know that. Thank you for that. I can't wait for our students to benefit from this, Rico. I have two very related and very quick last ones, and then we'll open it up to those who are here with us. So the first is, so we did, I think the subjectivity objectivity thing with regards to curating spectatorship of art. Argument, I think, is really the crucial
step, exactly.
The crucial step, right? That you brought out quite nicely. Okay, so I think that the other is going to be, so then here we don't, and I think this leads to the other two questions, right? So one, and these are sort of practical, but in a sort of Dewey sense, in a more rigorous understanding of practical, not in terms of will this sell or not, right? It's we're probably going to have a lot of curators, art critics, academics, not necessarily academics who are in explicitly the arts, right? But like myself, who works with philosophy, political theory, etc. Like I did a lot with art, as you know, because you really taught me a lot about that when I was in Beirut. So what will this course do for like this, like, or what will CAA, this department, do for anyone who's interested in making an argument? What is your plea to visuality, and how will this sort of cross, the social sciences, the humanities, the art history, the MFA, the art makers, the art practitioners, the curators, etc. Right? And also, I think it's very important for us to note this. Like every day, I get like 10 emails from eFlux. I get like new write-ups on like a new, like I live in the south of Bombay, as you know, like in Kolaba, where there are a lot of art galleries here. I've been in Beirut for a long time. You're there. You know art openings. I feel like when I read a write-up on an exhibition, like I can't differentiate what's being said about that exhibition from something else, right? Often in the press, we have this in journals, etc. Like, right. So this second question is more for, the more academic or art critical, but it also, I think, relates to art makers. It's like, again, I brought up this every, like I think I don't even know how to differentiate between 10 different films I see in the very brief occasions I go to contemporary art openings, right in my neighborhood, even in Bombay, which is new media sort of openings where it's every write-up is we're collapsing the distinction between fact and fiction in this. Like it's just like, what film doesn't do that? What film has ever not done that? What speech? Like when I say something to you right now, I could be lying. I'm like, that's the thing about speech. It's like that it lends itself to doubt or images. Like so this, like these hooks of sort, right? Like I would call them hooks, like a Britney Spears track or I can't think of new pop music. Drake. Although I like Drake,
Drake, exactly.
But these hooks that I think result in a lot of students, a lot of aspiring curators, artists, art critics, academics going into the arts that they feel they have to abide by. That I think are actually a tremendous disservice to them. Like doing foundational courses on seeing, on thinking, on writing, on making, which is what we've talked a lot about. This BICAR is really up to. Could you say something about that, and then we'll open it up?
Yeah. So that's really easy in a sense, which is there's one good medicine for all of this. If I can just tell you a little. Do a little detour that I think sums this up. I've got a good friend who's a doctor, and we were childhood friends, and just a few years ago I was talking to him. I can't remember what we were talking about, and he said, we've got he's some high-tech oncologist or something like that, and I said to him, so how do you know, right? How do you know? And he said, I have to look at the patient. I just have to, at some point, when all the discussion and all the tests, I just have to look at the patient. He's been doing it for a long time now. And I just have to stop, and then it begins to make sense. And I kind of want to say the same thing about art. There is, what you're describing is that whole media world and the whole, it's our social discourse about, we're collapsing we're collapsing the paradigm. We're changing things. We're deconstructing everything. No longer about that. I mean, that's sort of, it's like driving down the highway and seeing road signs on the highway. Yeah, that's what there is. The antidote to all of that is just spend time looking at whatever artwork you've chosen. Don't see 100 movies. See one movie and see it 2 or 3 times. Right? I mean, just to give you an example, I say I'm a Picasso expert. I've been doing this, for longer than most people who are listening to this probably have been alive, right? I looked at this painting yesterday for the first time. It took me 20 minutes before I could work out what was going on, right? I spent 20 minutes like, what's going on? And then suddenly at some point, it kind of clicks. It took me 20 minutes, right? How much longer is it going to take somebody who doesn't have my academic training? It just takes a huge amount of time. And there's no way around that. But once you do that, everything follows from there. So, and this is, but where this does feed through into makers and practitioners, right? Which is, if you're curating and you're just walking in and you're saying, oh, that looks good, that looks good, that looks good. Yeah, I think we'll kind of go together because they all look like, post-capitalist, considerations of human labor now, right? That's not going to do it, right? If you look, whatever it is that you're putting into show, you have to look in detail, even in the same detail as we've been looking at this. You have to look at it closely. And for an artist as well, you have to think this. If you're practicing artist, and students come out of my classes all the time who are artists, and they're saying, "Whoa, that's how you make a painting. You don't just put a couple of squiggles on the painting and on the thing and say, oh, that looks good," right? You work out how you're structuring it, how you're making it, so that it can be read, in a sense, by somebody. To work out what it is, plus this idea that people have that many students aren't aware with, which is an artwork should make an argument, right? It should be saying something, right? Which is, so now how do I structure a painting that's saying something? That's, in a sense, that's what art schools should be doing. In some ways, is how can I make it say what I wanted to say? So all of those things. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And this is true as well for people who aren't into art, right? But who, no one's going to take the class who doesn't like art anyway, who isn't interested in it. But this is what I'm proposing is the most rewarding way you can get into it, right? Funnily enough, is to do this critical analysis of it. Once you've got into it in that depth, once you've worked out, you sort of have to pour yourself into the painting in a sense. Lacan says this somewhere: pour yourself dream. You have to pour yourself into it and kind of imagine that you're in it and work your way around it and understand it quite often spatially, and then it will begin to make sense. And then I promise you'll never forget it again. It's there, it's locked in, and
you can't turn the switch off. You can't turn the switch off. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly.
No. Last thing, just to as a comment. I mean, I think that was great. I mean, that's again what the goal of the department is. What the goal of certainly Rico's first course is. And then subsequent courses that will be taught in the department is precisely to it seems like I find it very, very, very sad to watch young. There's so much for young artists, so many grant opportunities all for emerging artists, young artists, so much, right? But it's almost like everything is about do what we're doing, just learn the language and do it, and then you're gonna get it. But when there are a billion young artists who are like applying for these things across the world, from sort of New York to Tokyo, across the world, who are doing this, it's just I mean, being on juries myself, like you've been on many juries, like it just it's very hard to differentiate between applications, between artworks, to evaluate them, publications. It's like, because we've done a disservice, I think, pedagogically, to the youth, so despite the fact that we're throwing tons of money at the youth, right, with lots of grant opportunities, it's sort of like only a few of the youth can come through, but we're not really teaching them to foundationally understand what it means to make, what it means to exhibit, what it means to write, what it means to argue, ultimately. And this is really, I think, from this, from what we've talked about with the department, this is what we want to try and offer. And this is a gap filling gesture. It's not, meet this artist who has succeeded, or meet this curator who has succeeded, meet this writer who is, writes on everything in this city or that city. It's like, no, like we want to cultivate you to think critically about visuality and thought, and in relationship to visuality, and this is why I'm so thankful you're doing this, Rico. But that's all I have to say, and go ahead, and then we'll open it up, and then people.
Sorry, so I was just going to say, so for me, I've really been thinking about this. What does critical mean in this context that we're talking about, right? And in some ways, the closest that I can get to is you don't accept, first of all, you don't accept the status quo, right? Which is if everybody's saying it, you should go back and start thinking about it from the beginning. That's what radical means, radical in terms of roots, like start from the beginning. But there's another sense in which it sort of means nothing is neutral. There's no neutrality anywhere. Right? Whatever looks like it just is, because that's the way it is. That's where critical thinking can go in, right? Work out how did it come to look like it's neutral, and what are the structures behind it and inside it that are producing this thing, and then cover it so that it looks just neutral. I mean, that's what paintings do, right? You look at a painting, oh, it's just a painting. And what I mean by critical analysis is strip away that, oh, it's just a painting with squiggles, to what's behind it that's making it into this thing in a particular way. And once you start doing that, the squiggles disappear, it all begins making perfect sense. So that's my sense of critical thinking. And that's why I'm so pleased to be, that we're working together and that I'm associated with BICAR in that sense of always kind of uncovering, like working to uncover what's behind the supposed neutrality, ordinariness of everyday life. In a sense, there's always something ticking along underneath it, behind it. And can I just add something over here? So we didn't speak about the course, the upcoming course in Manet. Should I just say that? So I didn't deal with anything with Manet today, but everything that I've said is in Manet. Everything that we've been talking about is in all the questions, all the ways of thinking, and to my way of thinking, just like Picasso is a great critical thinker, Manet is in some ways the ultimate critical thinker. He really takes apart all the standard received notions and really just like drills down and inquires about them, and then produces these amazingly complex images that just sum up all, what the problems are, what the issues are. He doesn't necessarily have good answers, but boy, he really, really gets down to understanding what the core issues are in two particular things. And let me just see if I've got the paintings here, which is, one of them is modernity. So this is not by Manet, but you might think it's by Manet, but once you've taken the course, you'll know why it's not. This is a modern scene, right? Modern dress, modern structures, modern dress, modern structures, modern buildings, modern people. That's modernity in some ways. And the other big question is representation of females. How do you represent females? This also is another painting that's not by Manet, but these two issues are kind of welded together inside so much of his work. And that's what the course is about. We're really going to take that apart and see, not so that we are cleverer than Manet in understanding his art, but the other way around, so that Manet can teach us. That's ultimately what this is about. Manet is a critical thinker. Let him teach us what he's thinking about modernity. That's the point of the class.
No, we can't wait for it. And but this invites me, and then last thing, and then is that it's interesting that you chose for like a institute that's based in Bombay to do a course on Manet, we do have a lot of students from the Americas and Europe, again from East Asia, but we do have a lot of students from Europe and from the Americas, but a lot of our students are from BICAR, the Bombay Institute of Critical Analysis and Research, right? It's in Bombay, Beirut, where you are, where I conceived of BICAR, like in a certain sense, why Manet? Why not Etel Adnan? Why not Walid Sadiq, or why not
I'll tell you why. So in all the years that I've been teaching in places all around the world, I have never had a student, from Africa, from India, from wherever, who ever said to me, why are we doing Manet? That's so irrelevant. I've never had anybody say, all I've ever had is like, by the time we reach the end of the course, they're saying, it's like, but that's exactly like, right? It's sort of like he's the tool. He's kind of like the screwdriver that you use to unlock this whole idea. I mentioned this to you just a little bit earlier. this is the first, this episode in the mid 1850s is the first trial run of modernity as insurgency, right? So you have tradition, traditional way of life, and then suddenly this thing called modernity, zap, it kind of comes in the middle and it eats that tradition out from the inside out, in a sense. And Manet is, he's a ringside, he's got ringside seats. He's sitting and he's watching this happening and he's thinking about it. And that trial run, in a sense, of modernity as insurgency is being repeated everywhere, every day. It acts out in slightly different ways. But as I say, nobody has ever said to me, it's like, well, Manet said that, but that's not true. All they ever say is like, oh my God, it's still happening today. It just provides you a way of thinking it through right from the beginning. And it also makes clear what parts are relevant, what parts aren't relevant, what things have changed. It's just such an incisive tool. And I think it's a bit like reading Marx. Right? I mean, you read Marx.
No, I totally agree. But then we get now in this day and age, as contemporary Rico, as you know, like and this is certainly true of the art world, like the fashionable trend is decolonizing, right? So like, okay, so if it's analogic, Manet is analogic. If nobody in Beirut or in Bombay has said, or in Africa or whatnot has said, why don't we just like why use the white man, right?
Yeah, and they're not either or, right? I don't have any
exactly
good answer for that, right? I mean, this is where it gets really interesting, right? The more pillars you have, the more you see the interplay between them. But as I say, he's such, in terms of the question, for me, he really is the master of this kind of thinking about, and believe me, he's got lots to say about coloniality, kind of embedded within the artwork. Picasso, another one, he's got lots to say about coloniality and ways of thinking about it and what post-coloniality might look like, in a sense. But these ways of kind of putting it together with this incredibly sophisticated visual formation. That's what's really so fascinating, right? It takes a lot of digging. You don't find it, it's not on the surface. He doesn't just come out and whack you over the head with it, right?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about the Manet, the Manet course, I mean, which I think resonates, is that it's the white man also, doing this criticality, criticality and composition, this tableau of sorts at the very crux of the emergence of industrial capital, which didn't exist, and it's impossible for us to understand aesthetics, outside of the emergence of this particular social formation or power. But I mean, I think I can't wait for this course, Rico. I really can't. It's gonna be brilliant.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, let's open it up, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna switch off, but everyone who's still here, like, please, I know we went on longer, but ask and turn on your videos, ask Rico questions, ask us questions about the development, etc. Do not be shy.
Is there anything in the chat? I haven't been paying attention as we've been.
As usual, I don't either. So that's
right.
Let me look in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, nothing, no particular.
I mean, we can. Let me ask a question. Okay, here's UV, and then Sonali B UV.
Oh, sorry.
It's Orvi. Yes.
Yeah, I just hidden my name for something else. I just thank you so much for that. I just had a very, very basic question to ask you, in the sense of, when you're making work, as you said, there is an argument that you're making as well. And just what actually separates art and philosophy then? What and I mean, this is something I'm also thinking about at the moment, as what is it about senses that works into how we're looking, but there's something beyond the senses, and what is it that's in the middle of the eye and the act of looking? So what is that gap as well, which enables something else to happen. So yeah, what would it, one thing is as a maker or as a, what is the difference between doing art and doing philosophy, but what is the difference between reading art and reading philosophy then? Yes, thank you.
All right, so thank you for that question. People are going to think, anybody who knows me will think that I planted you in the audience to ask that question, because that's just, yeah, try and stop me now, my friends. So, so first of all, as often happens, you sort of answered your own question in a sense over there, which is, so first of all, there's a huge overlap between art and philosophy, just in that sense of, asking the question, what's going on? What's happening over here? How do these things work? Right. So that's the fundamental thing. And pretty much all philosophy and a whole lot of art is asking that question. It's like an investigation to what's going on? How is this, whatever it is that you're looking at, how's it working? Why is it working? How is it operating? But then they kind of split off in a sense at certain points, because there's one way of thinking about those questions verbally, and then there's another way of thinking about those questions visually. So, I happen to have been doing a lot of reading in phenomenology recently, and as I was saying, so there's all these writings, phenomenology from the, going from starting in almost with Nietzsche and then kind of running forward, so through most of the 20th century. And there's all kinds of interesting stuff in there. But I can take you back, we can read something by Merleau-Ponty, but then I can take you back to some Roman vase painting, right? Just things that were done 2,000 years ago. And you'll see they're doing exactly the same things that, the 20th century thinkers are doing, but they're doing it in even more depth. So for me, there's just there are different ways of knowing, right? So words take you into one way of thinking. There's a whole lot of, just to say, there's a whole lot of binary thinking that happens with words. You always have to say not this, but that, not this, but that, that, but not this. So you had a lot of argumentation that's saying, well, we can do this, but we can't do that. Visual art has a lot of difficulty. I'll just throw this in. Visual art has a lot of difficulty with no. It's very difficult to put a no into a visual art. So you have to think of a different way of constructing the argument. You have to think of a different way of kind of presenting it so that it leads you on and kind of fills you in and fills you up in some ways, just as I was talking about over there with the Picasso painting over there, right? Try and put that into words. First of all, it'll take forever and it's probably be pretty dull and boring. It's much more interesting to look at it in the image. And then you also have this other sense when you're looking at that, you can say to yourself, well, if I'm looking at something, if I'm looking at a model, if I'm looking at the person that I love, is that how it feels to me? Maybe it does feel a little bit, no, I feel something completely different. And then, whoops, and now I've got an artwork that I can do, right? So they just lead in those different directions. Once you have this kind of central part about it, then kind of on the fringes of how you articulate what those issues are, and then even what the problems are changes in relation to visuality as that changes in relation to what the words are. So that's my sort of shorter answer to the kind of separating art from philosophy. But then you asked this question about the there's so much to say about that, but between the eye and looking, instead of answering you, I am going to say there's one artist who more than anybody else investigates that issue, and that's Paul Cézanne. And we'll do a course on Paul Cézanne, and we will precisely look at what he's thinking about that question of eye and looking, right? So I don't know, and I don't want to go to psychology, where we'll say, oh, if you put somebody in a box and then you flash a light around, it's like, I don't want to know what psychology says about eye and looking. But so many artists have stopped and thought about that process of eye and looking. So it's not, there's no definitive answer, but a lot of artists have really spent a lot of time thinking about that. And that again, that's what I mean by a theory. Cézanne has a theory about looking. And that's, so that's my answer to you over there.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't switch my video on, but yeah, this is very helpful, and it reminded me of a psychoanalysis class recently. We were trying to make the distinction between you're not just listening, you're lending an ear, and so
exactly.
the way you were saying it reminded me of that. So thank you so much.
Yes, great comment. Exactly right. Absolutely.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, Rico. Sonali, you had your hand up and you put it down, but I think that's because I announced you as next. So. Or Rico, I'm fielding your questions, or do you want to field them yourself?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, sure, I can ask. Can you hear me? So,
Yeah.
am I audible? So I think my question was, it's a small one. It's in the beginning when you mentioned we don't look at the biographical of the artist. Like I'm struggling a bit with that because a lot of what I'm used to,
Yeah.
I think the first, like you mentioned, the first question I tend to ask when I look at a work is also, why did the artist make that? Like, why did they paint that painting? And to answer that, you tend to look at their history or their story, especially when it's works that's maybe are more political in nature or more contemporary, and the artist is alive or here. So do we completely negate that, or can it be one component amongst others? Is just, I don't know. I just wanted to ask, sorry.
So thank you for that really honest question. And I'll tell you, it gets even worse. When you come with me to do a site visit, right? So we go to a museum. Not only do I not allow you not to read about the artist, I forbid you from reading the label of the artwork. So you're not even allowed to know the title, right? That's the only way you're going to look at it. If you read the title, it's like, oh, it's about that. Oh, maybe I can find that in there. What I want you to do is just look at the painting and work it out. Now, that's part of, I'm not saying that's easy, right? It's very difficult to do. And it takes a lot of learning. And I mean, that's part of what we do in the courses. Half of the courses, all this theoretical stuff that I'm talking to you, half of the classes are teaching you, in a sense, it's like, you know, what's the alphabet? How do you read A, B, C, D? I mean, it's as basic as that, and as simple as that, and as difficult as. But let me ask you a question. If you know something about a philosopher, give me the name of a philosopher who you like.
We've been reading a lot about Marx and Freud.
Okay, stop. Okay, so do you ask, why did Marx say what he said? You don't ask that. You don't care about his biography. What if you want to know why Marx said what he said? You read the book. He tells you why he's saying what he's saying. Good art, I know that's a loaded term, right? But a lot of good art already does that. It tells you why it's doing it. That's what makes it philosophy. You don't have to. One of the reasons I understand, one of the reasons people go back to biography is because they're not that, you're much better at reading a text by Marx. You've got the words you've been reading all of your life. Learning to read images and look at images really carefully is very difficult. It's not easy. It's certainly a lot, I mean, reading texts when you're young is very difficult, and reading art is even more difficult, and you have nowhere near the same experience. So you kind of think, oh, a way in is I'll go into the biography, don't give me some clues. Oh, I can see it in the painting, right? And it just makes it easier, and you think you have a way in. But I promise you, I have the magic sauce. I have the magic secret. You walk in, you look at a picture, and you start. And there's a methodology of how you go into a picture. That's a lot of what the courses are about. Is I looked at that. Honestly, I looked at that, and every time this happens to me, for all of these years, I still get scared. Right? I look at a painting, and this is a joke. Like you walk into a museum with your family, right? Your family saying, "Oh, you're a big professor. What's that painting about?" Right? And I look at the painting, it's like, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. And I have that same kind of panic. And then I start with my methodology, and within 2 minutes, they're thinking, wow, that's so brilliant. How did he do that? It's like, it's just like the alphabet once you know how to do it. So you may not believe me, but it's true, is all I can say. You have to go in and you have to do this. You got to do the work. Otherwise, biography is always wrong. Biography is leading you. It's leading you in the same way that Vermeer is suckering you into something, right? Vermeer is kind of saying to you, it's like, oh, look, it looks so realistic. You almost believe that I really do paint in my velvet outfit, right? Biography's got that same kind of thing. It's so seductive. It's like, oh, that's why I did it. I can see it there. Just go back to the Marx model. That's my best example. It's like, it's like, where was Marx born? What were his brothers and sisters like? Did he have a father who was tough? It's like, that's irrelevant to the text. Think of it the same way.
And if I can pile on to that great answer to Sonny's great question before Kunal, ask the question. Rico, that was great. You know, I think this is something you also taught me when I was a young tot in Beirut. You know, like and you would grace me with invitations at times when I, you know, to have dinner, or we'd meet at AUB. Was that this does not mean the death of the author, the death of the artist, right?
No, no.
What you've just said is like what I learned from you is like it's a retroactive. So it's not like you start with the intention of the artist and then you read the work that way, but you read the work and then the artist is alive or dead on the basis of your reading of the work. Right?
So it's the opposite. It's not the death of the artist, it's the resurrection of the artist.
Exactly.
You're taking the artist seriously.
Beautifully put.
What is the artist saying? It's like, that's what they're there for. It's like, listen to what they're saying, you know.
So it's not a positivist art history, social science. It's like it's a what, to use a fancy, but we don't have to use this fancy term because we'll explain it in our classes, and Rico certainly will. The sort of dialectic between subjectivity and objectivity that's presented itself in like we don't even know. Like, I mean, the artist doesn't even know what they're doing entirely, but does know something of what she's doing. The viewer doesn't know entirely what the artist is doing, but does know something of what she's doing, Sonali, as you're saying. But
exactly.
So that moment of like sort of like anxiety led to what is called, unfortunately, I think, Rico, I think, I don't know if you'll disagree with me on this, but like our postmodern turn, which is like, let's just kill the artist, right? Let's kill the author, right? And just subjectivize according to the viewer, which we don't want to do, or objectivize according to the date of the painting, the medium of the painting.
Exactly.
You know, and we're not after either of those two. We actually are preserving.
In a funny way.
Yeah.
We're preserving the seriousness.
Preserving, like, I think it'd be like a better way to put this is like a secular immortalization of the artist and her work, right? So
exactly.
It's the way that we should be respectful, I think, to reading art and text and theory or whatever, or being with lovers or whomever. So.
Exactly. Now, I just want to add to that over there. You use the word positivist art history. What positivist art history does is it says, so all right, so it'll say, okay, we're not going to talk about the artist, but then they'll see, say, a Picasso painting, and they'll see abstract art, and they'll say, abstract art, you know, they came around just at the same time as Einstein's theory of relativity, right? And then they'll say, oh, and then there's these big upheavals that are happening, and so the big upheavals, somehow the artist is feeling them, and then somehow they're manifested. It's like, you know, how can you draw that direct, you know, attention? I'll give you a little example. So the artist Claude Monet, the Impressionist, right? He, you know, his most idyllic paintings, you know, they're not my favorites, but, you know, he does the water lilies and these fields and all that kind of stuff. They were done when he was in the middle of one of the wars in France, right? So now, just think about how fallacious this thinking is. Let's say he would have been through a really dark period, right? Let's say he would have been through he would have painted all kinds of deathly scenes. Then positive art history would say, oh, there's a war. The war is coming through and he's feeling really bad, right? But then when he's not doing a war and he's doing poppies in the fields, nobody says, oh, it's not quite working. It just shows you that kind of positivist link between, you know, the zeitgeist or between history. I'm not saying that they don't influence you, but you can't just assume that it's this kind of direct causality. There's a direct causation. I have this fight with my colleagues all the time, that kind of positivist art history. It's so difficult to get away from that. Those are the two really difficult modes to get away from, is biography and this kind of direct causality of history. It's so much more complex than that. And the point is, it's more complex and it's less complex because the work is telling you why it's doing what it's doing. Just read the work is what I want to say, right? It's telling you how it's working out these things in relation to itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sonali and Rico, for that. Kunal, and then others after Kunal.
Sure. So I'm scared this might just take us back like a couple of steps. But just going back to like your response to what Sonali was saying, you know, you were mentioning about like the Picasso painting and that about the painting, which you can't write about, that can only be communicated through that artwork. Couldn't that like what he's trying to communicate about the experience of painting his muse of the bed or whatever, could that, what I see as kind of a subjective Picasso feeling, be informed by his biographical factor? Oh, okay.
So yes. So now I just want to say, I'm not, it's subjective. It's all subjective, right? In the sense the artist, what you want from the artist is to be subjective in that sense, right? You want him to say, this is what I think and this is why I think it. But yeah, and of course it can be informed, just like Marx's theory can be informed by, you know, I don't know, by a maid that he had when he was young, just like Freud's theory might be informed by. But the point is, so now this is going to sound about weird, it sounds strange, it's like, is that interesting? What's much more, I'm much more interested in seeing what Marx says about capitalism than by finding out about Marx's psychobiography. That doesn't, yeah, that's interesting if I'm interested in Marx as a person, right? If I'm interested in Picasso as a person, but I think their work is much more interesting than, okay, so then, you know, so now I know about Picasso as a person, and now what? Now I'm going to forget it because now the next thing goes on, well, now I want to know about, you know, Beyonce as a person, right? I'm just saying randomly because that's the way it operates, this kind of cult of personality. But I get much more from looking at the Picasso painting than I do than finding out about his biography. I just wanted to clarify just one little point. You said that the Picasso painting, that there are these various things that can't be put into words. I'm not quite saying that. I think they can be put into words if you're really careful. But I think the way, you know, if you're a poet, maybe you can write something that gets at that same sensation that Picasso was writing about, right? But he's thinking about it visually, and it works really well for him visually, and he's presenting it visually. I'm not saying it's wordless. I'm not saying, oh God, we can only, you know, we understand it visually, but then this is part of the argumentation. This is what makes us academics, right? It's like, I'm seeing this, let me think about it and try and articulate it and try and articulate how it works.
So I guess I just want to say quickly that I fully agree that it's definitely more interesting what they're trying to say through the artwork. I just think that as someone who, I haven't read much, but like my foray into this has been through text. And
yeah.
I find myself, every time I go to a gallery, I find myself thinking, okay, here's the text. I think I understand what's happening. I just can't make that connection to the visual. And this is something I've been trying to figure out, like, how do I read the painting rather than read about the painting and then hopefully see what's going on. And why I find that maybe the subjective thing interesting is perhaps biographical stuff is something that maybe you can make it relatable, and then like it's a first step into perhaps understanding that gray area that can't be communicated academically, but maybe poetry and writing, you know, so that's where I'm at. Yeah,
I'm saying this as a joke. That's a little bit like I'm worried that you're going to get, you know, addicted to the wrong drug. Right. It's like saying, well, it's like, I'm not going to do heroin, but like, oh, I'll have a cigarette. It's like, oh my God. And then suddenly, you know, then you're doing heroin, right? And the heroin is like, oh, the biography of the artist, right? Just stay away from that. It's dangerous stuff. Don't go near any of those drugs. Just look at the painting. And the best way, even if you're reading other people, right? Even if you're reading what other people say about it, almost everybody in the middle of this really miserable biography that I hate, there'll be a sentence that'll suddenly be about the painting. And then you can suddenly sit up and say, oh, now I learned something. And if you do that time enough, and you know, if you do art history courses and you just spend the time looking at it, but you have to do it. It's one of those things that you really have to spend a lot of time being confused and not knowing. And the best way to do that, I will say also, the best way to do that is in discussion with somebody. It's very difficult to do it by yourself. If you're sitting around, if 2 or 3 of you are sitting around a painting and working out what's going on, and somebody says, I see this is like nonsense, but it's not that, I think it's that. That's a much easier way to get into visuality and visual paintings.
Well, thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I'm looking forward to attending the classes.
Sure.
That's a great exchange. Thanks, Kunal, and thank you, Rico. Are there like other questions for Rico, or for BICAR? I mean, of which we're really excited to have Rico as the chair of our new Department of Critical Analysis and Art. Are there any questions for the vis-a-vis the department or institutionally? Yes, Rebecca. Musician.
Hello.
Are you in Kathmandu?
Yes, I'm once again. I'm still here. My question is actually about the neutrality point. I'm still not clear about it, especially since I'm looking at it from the musician's point of view. You can't see something as neutral, right? Because if you have a song, you have the harmony, which is basically all the tension, which is the story, right? Or what they're trying to say. So the uncovering of, I think you had mentioned something, uncovering the neutrality by looking or analyzing the piece of art. And how would you look at it? Because art, I don't know enough about like visual art, but musically it's not at all neutral, and it can't be neutral in that sense.
Can I help you with that, Rohit?
Sorry?
No,
If I can let you guys out.
Kathmandu is creating an echo, Rebecca. Or is that just me? Or is that Bombay? Which
Well,
way?
I think
But I was going to
that's
say
Rebecca. I think she's got an external speaker on. Can you turn down? That might be.
But I was
Just
just
turn
going
it
to
down a bit. There's a bit
I
of
don't think
feedback.
you were celebrating the neutral in your comment.
No.
Or a notion of objectivity outside of subjectivity, right? I mean, like you were
Yes.
criticizing that one, and I think it's important for you to clarify this because I'm glad Rebecca asked this because yes.
Yes. So now what I want to say, Rebecca, is so it's funny, that all of these different spheres of investigation within the humanities, right, like philosophy or art or music, each one has their advantage that gets them into criticality quicker. And I find that musicians are the ones who get quickest into this notion of criticality because there is no neutrality, right? I can do, if I take a photograph of, I'm looking out at the scene over a mountain and the sea over here, I'll take a picture and you'll just say, oh, that's a mountain and the sea, right? If I write something, right, as part of the text, I say, oh, well, I went downstairs, I went out for breakfast this morning. That reads like it's neutral, but music is inherently not neutral because it's already, there's no forgive me for saying this, right? There's no natural thing that it's imitating. It's not an imitative art. So there's nothing that you can say, oh, it's referring back to something that just is. So music is already inherently, you can't pretend it's like not structured. It's got to be structured right from the beginning. But so that's already a way of analyzing how it's doing what it's doing. So almost all musicologists I know are already good at this kind of like, you can't just listen to a piece of music and say it's like, it's a pretty piece of music. It's like you got to say, what are the harmonic structures? You're into it already there. But I will tell you something that does amaze me. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a musicologist speaking, and they were speaking about Verdi, the opera composer, right? And they were doing, it was psychoanalysis, and they were doing just the stuff that I'm saying about, which is don't do a psychobiography. They were doing the psychobiography of Verdi. And they were saying Verdi had mother issues, right? He had problems with his mothers. And when you look at, and the way he analyzed this, he said, if you look at all of these operas, there's always a strong woman and a weak woman, and there's this mother, and it's like, and he did this whole paper, and I was just like, I was tossing and turning in my chair and getting incredibly angry. But then it suddenly occurred to me, even if he wanted to make his arguments, okay, even if I think it's a lot of nonsense what he's saying, but let him say it. But at least he did this whole talk in reference to the words only. He never mentioned the music. Right? So to me, that's just like, now that's the worst kind of psychobiography, right? Okay, make an argument where he's using these words, but then the music is telling a story, right? The structure of the music, the way it's working, as I said, the harmonic structures, the rhythms, all that kind of stuff is all coming together. I'm amazed at how many people revert to this, Wagner was this crazy guy, this is why his music sounds like this in this particular way. So to me, criticality is forget about the biography, think about how this music is telling a particular story. So that's a really sharp question, if I can say. It's like you really go onto it. There is no, in something like that, there is no neutrality. There's no, oh, well, it's just, that's just the way the world is, kind of a thing. That's what I'm critiquing in relation to neutrality. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
It does. It's just that I think once before we had also, can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
It's better. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we had mentioned also before that what tends to happen is things get very descriptive, and like you mentioned also, if you only look at the lyrics, then it says one thing.
Yeah.
So how would, in that case, okay, you look at it in terms of art, because it's, I don't know how to explain. I don't have the, because it is very visual, right? So how do you look into the visual itself? So even if the lyrics, so even if something was descriptive, without the harmony, how would you still look at what is being said and what is being what the artist is trying to convey? If that makes sense.
Right. So the thing is that, so you're a musician, I understand, right? Now, the thing is, when you listen to music, you hear it in a completely different way than I do, and I think I'm a keen amateur musician, but you're still hearing all these other complexities within it that are going on, right? And part of me being able to understand the music fully is that I need somebody like you to say to me, this is what's happening. These are how these things are happening over there. And we need to take it apart and understand how it's being said and what's being said. And in the same way around, when you're looking at art, you need somebody to walk you through it, right? This is, in some ways, the problem. It's the same problem with music as with visual art. Everybody thinks they're an expert, right? It's like, oh, I love music. Bum, 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 I love music. Oh, I love art. Look at those pretty colors, right? You have to get in behind that to kind of understand how it's been. The whole point about all of this is it's all structured, right? It's all built up in some way. And so for me, that's what criticality is, right? Is you don't accept how it looks like on, what it looks like on the surface. You get in from underneath and you see how it's being kind of composed and put together. And then just to come back, we've been talking about, Rohit, you're talking about this kind of social political angle, right? Once you get in at the groundwork where you see how it's all being put together, that's when you suddenly see the political choices being made. That's where you see the social choices being made. And then it becomes much easier to talk about it in relation to those social issues, instead of just saying, oh, I agree with it or I disagree with it. It's like, if you think about the social form in this way, then it's going to emerge in this particular way. It's going to come out in that particular way. It's a whole new universe that gets opened up once you start thinking about it in this way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, just one more thing. But while you were talking about this, since both like how you analyze like a work of art, or how I look at a song, it is essentially a language. It is a learned language.
Yes, absolutely.
How would you then look at how would you then analyze art as the language it is? Because it is essentially becoming a philosophy, is what you're saying. So how would that also influence the way you look at art?
Right. So it's absolutely, it's a language. That's the essential thing. It's no accident that a whole lot of abstract art looks the same, right? It's no accident that a whole lot of music, written by people in 17th century Ethiopia sounds the same, right? They're all working with the same vocabulary. And you just have to learn that. There's no way around it, right? You can't complain about it. Oh, it's like, I don't understand the language. You want to understand the language, you learn the language. The way you do that is you listen to it a lot. You hopefully can get people to help you explain it. But the thing is that I do think about art, and I have to say this on the basis of, I don't know how many decades of teaching. Good art, so visual art at least, and I suspect this is true for all of the art media, explains itself. If you pay really careful attention to it, it tells you how, it provides the key, its own key to its own opening, right? So, on the one hand, you need help, you need people to help you and all this kind of stuff. But really, if you're really, really paying attention, this is what I was saying, it's like, it will teach you. That's part of, to me, that's been the miracle of this. You know, when I started out in art history, I was doing that positivist stuff. And it was kind of like, I loved art, but I felt that something was missing. And then suddenly I managed to find my way into it. And then suddenly it was like, whoa, it will teach me. It teaches me what I need to know. Some people say, oh, you need to understand the historical context to understand the work. To me, it's the other way around. You go into the art will tell you how much historical context it needs. I mean, just funnily enough, that funny little Picasso drawing that I showed you of the artist, wearing that, that outfit. He's telling you, that's his reference. I'm going back. You don't need to know anything more than that. He's telling you, this is all the context you need to know. And everything else that you learn apart from that, right, where you go in and you learn all the big context, and Picasso was working at the time of Einstein and the atom bomb came along, and it's all superfluous. It's like biography. It's not really, if it's not in the image, it's not in the image. You don't need it, right? So that's my answer to that, to your very astute questions over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Like on I think again what we're up to and why I'm so excited about Rico coming on to head this it's really exciting department on the critical analysis of art. Rebecca, and everyone, so not to become too textual, because this is very, very, but although I think Rico's done a really good job of sort of really breaking down the barriers between text and art and visuality and reading, right? Seeing and reading and seeing, and so-called thinking in that sort of classical Cartesian distinction, right? Phenomenology and what's real, thinking. But I think that what we have, what the importance of why, let me just say this right now, and because I think Rebecca in this conversation has brought this up and has foregrounded this in a very important way. Why would, okay, so we do a lot of philosophy at BICAR, right? We do a ton of philosophy at BICAR. We do a ton of writing. Rebecca, you know this, some of you might not know this who are here, others do. Why would, are we just doing it because, the art market is hot, it's we're gonna get more students because, we need to do this. No. It's really because, I mean, again, what Rico's taught me, I think, and I was young taught again in Beirut. I don't think, is that there really is not a distinction between, I don't think, sound, between philosophy, between visuality at all. You really can't write anything, you can't think anything, you can't make anything, you can't exhibit anything without having a foundational understanding of where do images come from, where does language come from, where does sound come from, and everything we want to do, in this institute is get to these foundational questions. And we don't want to talk nonsensically about Deleuze, about not, Deleuze is brilliant. I mean, but I spent many years studying Deleuze. But a lot of you, like Rebecca, you're a brilliant musician, right? Pari Bartana, who's going to go next, is a brilliant researcher, artist, and curator. Lena's a great curator. Like a lot of you are coming from spaces where you're expected to be a jack of all trades in this sort of contemporary art world. You should be able to know everything at the same time, but you can't, and that's heavily anxiety inducing, right? And so what we want to do with our courses, and I think, which is why Rico and I decided to even sort of launch this separate department, is that you won't have to be a dilettante, you won't have to be a jack of all trades, as I think contemporary interdisciplinary academia and the art world asks you to do, nor will you have to, right, sort of be like a hardcore specialist. Like I know how to solve 2 + 2, and nobody else does. That's my specialty, right? It equals 4. We want to provide you with just foundational ways of thinking, of seeing,
Yeah,
of making,
exactly.
of viewing,
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
etc.
Exactly. And then once you have that, then everything else becomes easy. Honestly, all that other stuff,
exactly.
all that other stuff people will ask you to do. It's like, well, now I'm starting from somewhere. I know how to think this stuff through. Sure. And then, I can do it or I can't do it. It's honestly,
but I agree. And also you'll actually, through not being general, like a generalist, which is what we're aiming to, because every day we get an email about a new art school or a new gallery or a new write-up, that is the exact same thing with a different work. I mean, again, it's not a criticism. It's really good for us. Like, it's good for all of us to see art, to see this funding of these types of institutes. But we really want you to think, like what Rico was saying about like thinking critically, is really important to us. Like we want you to be, sort of singularly different, right? Like in a certain way about how you approach an object, how you approach a work of art, how you make it, how you see it, how you write about it, how you argue about it is a very important term. But let's go to Pari and then Ananya, and then we'll wrap up in about 5 minutes.
Hi, Rico. Thank you for the talk. It's really provocative. So I could not stop myself asking this question. It's not a question, but like few points. One is like I completely agree what you are talking, but also like I'm just talking from my experience as an art student when I was studying. 2 artists who were kind of gloomy for me. They are Vincent van Gogh and Jackson Pollock. And I realized much later that it's because of their overwhelming biographies. That's how the practice also kind of hijacked, because their biography and the life is overwhelming and the thing. But also, I kind of disagree slightly. Like, it's not possible to look at an artwork in the context of bare artwork, like the way Agamben used bare life, devoid of all political associations and everything. So whenever you say Picasso, there are associations through which we understand any object. Even you say apple, also there are associations how we understand an apple. There is no idea, at least for human beings, to understand that, okay, this is a bare apple. We have to say, okay, this is this apple from Kashmir. If I say this apple is from Kashmir, then there is a political idea how that apple is brought up, or if I say that as apple is from Switzerland, then there is other kind of association. So for me, I don't know if it is at all possible to look at an artwork with bare eyes without having any association. Because in that context, why we are discussing Picasso, we are not discussing some XYZ artist or anybody, nobody. Like so I don't know if we can devoid all kind of political, social, economic thing. And also a little also disagree on this point that artwork will speak, because as human beings, we are also divided through our language, the way our bodies are made, the kind of culture we are brought up, and so it's not like, suppose if you immediately show me something from Peru or Mexico or any object, any art object, anything, it's even food. I'm hungry. Suppose you gave me a food from Mexico, it's not necessarily that I will immediately enjoy it because I'm hungry. It's not possible. Like, no, what I'm trying to say, like it's. I don't know if I'm clear or not so far.
Yeah, very
but
clear.
I'm saying I'm just saying that it's not possible for me, at least, to look an artwork barely, like bare artwork, the way Agamben talks of bare life, devoid of all political ideas. So this is what I want to just mention. Thank you for that very provocative discussion.
Thanks. Now, it's funny that you talk about this, and I often have to defend myself in this relation. But let me tell you a little story. So I'm actually just writing something for Rohit that we're going to be publishing fairly soon. And I'm talking about a 15th century painter, Mantegna is his name. And he does two paintings of the same subject. There's one particular Christian saint that he paints. And when I first started off, I was thinking, I was writing about them. And then the more I looked at them, the more I thought I knew what they were about, right? They're a particular painting of this guy, and I know what the guy's story is, and this is what it is. But the more I looked at them, the more I realized Mantegna is differing from the text, right? The text says the saint does one thing, but then Mantegna is kind of pulling off in this one direction, and then even more weird. So he's going off into a direction I didn't expect, but then he does this, and he does an artwork by this, about the same guy 15 years later. And this painting goes in a completely opposite direction, and they end up saying completely different things, right? Does that make sense, right? He's saying, on the one hand, he's saying, you will go, it's like saying, this guy ends up going to New York, and then in the next one you say, oh my God, this guy ends up and he's going to Moscow. I mean, it's as completely bizarre as that. Now, I would never have known that if I just looked at them and kind of said, oh, it's like, I know what Mantegna is, a Renaissance artist, blah, 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 blah. So this is one of the dangers. When you go in thinking what you know it's about, you often don't really get to the roots of it. Now, I understand what you're saying. Now, of course, every idea has associations. But there's a difference between, say, talking about, this apple is from, Kashmir, and this apple is from Switzerland. But what I'm getting at with the text is telling you something, right? And so now, to give you just another example. It happens to me all the time where I see an artwork and I don't know who it's by. So what do you want me to do, right? There's a whole lot of even modern artists. There's a whole lot of ancient artists. I don't know who they are. I know nothing about them. All I can do is I can look at the text and kind of go into it. Now, I know a certain amount. I can recognize a time period. So I can tell if a painting was done in the 20th century or if a painting was done in the 18th century. Just a couple of days ago, when I was looking for the Picassos, you do a Google search and a whole lot of images come up. And then there was this one interesting image, and I was looking at it and I was saying, it kind of looks like Picasso, but I'm not sure if it's by Picasso or not, right? So then I had to really sit down and think about it. And then I was kind of thinking, it's like Picasso in this way. It's not like him in that way, but maybe it's from a later time period. I had to go through this whole process. And in the end, I kind of realized it's sort of by someone who's copying Picasso, right? Someone who's influenced by Picasso, but it's not by him. So now, what you're doing when you're saying, I mean, I didn't get who the first artist was. You said Jackson Pollock. I don't know who the first one was, right? But now I wish, so now this is, I wish I had you as a young student. Honestly, I do this with students all the time. I put up a Jackson Pollock. The students here have never heard of Jackson Pollock. They don't know who the hell he is. And what's more, they just think abstract art is nonsense, right? Within an hour, I have them singing the praises and just, they do more detailed analysis of what's going on with Jackson Pollock than anybody I've ever had who starts off with saying, it's like, oh, and he was in Jungian analysis and he crashed his car on the way to the coming back from the psychoanalyst in New Jersey. It just gets you in a different way. Now, I'm not making this a hard and fast rule, right? I'm not the art police. I'm just saying these are interesting ways to go about it and to go over thinking about this. I think it would be now. You've been ruined. You've been ruined already for Jackson Pollock because you already know about his life. But I would actually say to you, you love his work. Make this your mission, right? Try this. Try going in and looking at an artwork by Jackson Pollock and spend a lot of time with it and forget about his biography. Just see if he's not doing something else. If he's not making a proposal about, the way in which the signifier circulates, the way in which he's thinking about space. I actually think that much more interesting than his psychology is what he's doing with space. It's like, what's that got to do with his psychology? And the reason that I can say this is because I'll tell you a little anecdote. I lived in Australia for a long time, and they had a big, there's one of the big Jackson Pollock paintings, Blue Poles it's called, is actually in the National Gallery there. And I used to take my students there. And for a period of 6 years, I took, I don't know how many classes there. That means that I sat in front of the Jackson Pollock. I worked it out for something like 250 hours. I spent looking at this painting. And I tell you, it just cured me of ever wanting to know what about him and his relationship with these women and his relationship with his mothers. It's just like that painting is, well, it's amazing in so many ways, and it's terrible in so many other ways, right? I look forward to having that discussion with you one day. We'll sit in front of a Jackson Pollock and we'll talk about it and we'll work it through. I promise you, you will find lots of other amazing things about it. So I'm not saying, once you have the associations, you have the associations. And there is no neutral knowing. I completely agree with that. There's no bare seeing. You're always starting from somewhere. But if you surrender to the artwork, this is part of what I'm saying, right? It's like, it's not that I know I'm interpreting the painting. It's like, I want to get myself into a resonance, to use like a musical form, right? Where the artwork is playing me. I want it to tell me what it's thinking, right? And that's a particular sort of active, passive way of going in and understanding what it's doing. And there's all kinds of different ways to do that, but that's part of what it's about. I think we're going to have lots more interesting discussions, Parivartana.
Yeah, I think Pari's going to be with you. Pari, you're going to be coming to Manet as well.
Thank you.
Okay. We're really pressing on time, and I've been bad.
There was somebody else who had a.
We give Ananya the last.
Right.
But I just want to say, like, just before, and then Ananya will have the last word. Or you will, Rico, of course, but in response to our question. But oh wait, is Ananya gone?
No, I see her waving over there.
Okay, she's here. Okay, but really, thank you so much. Like, this is.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Sorry, very quickly.
No, take your time, Ananya, and then.
Yeah. I just want to know what will the writing part of this class entail, because whenever, not being from the art, area, and just like Rico said, that's when I go to museums, I don't like to look at, the reading or the text. I want to look at the painting, and I'm, to some extent just chasing the experience and the emotion that the painting is, that it enhances. So I just want to know, what will the writing part of this class entail, because I find it very hard to come to that argument, as you said. So I just want to know, of course I know that you'll go through the methodologies and things like that, but specifically for writing, and how to get that. Yeah.
Right. So that's easy, actually. So because so much of the class, as I say, half of the class is this very sophisticated analysis, and the other half of the class is this kind of basically learning how to read an image. So you don't do any writing until the end of the class, right? Where you've already got it, you're beginning to do it. And then you just, you find a painting and you write about it. So you take an image that we haven't spoken about in class. And, we discussed that. We can talk about that, what image is interesting to you. And then you do an analysis of that image in the same way that we have learned to analyze the images. And you'll see certain themes come up, certain ways of thinking about it come up. So it's to kind of, sort of get into the analysis of the image in the same way as we've been doing in class. It's not, actually, it's difficult, it's not difficult in the sense, right? It's just a matter of, it's like saying, we'll learn to ride a bicycle and then you'll ride a bicycle. That's what the writing component is. You'll just ride the bicycle. There's work to be done, right? It's, you've got to do the work, but that's what it's about. Okay.
Thank you so much for this session. Looking forward to it.
Sure.
Let's let you have tea. I guess it's tea time for you in Beirut. It's you're probably getting to different times of
meals and ingestion. Go ahead, Rico. Did you want to say something?
So I just want to thank everybody. This has been fantastic, and I especially want to thank you, Rohit, for all the generous things that all the generous comments that you've made. And I have to say, it's so exciting to be, to where I just find what I do, the stuff that I do, that I've been, fighting with academics for years and years, it suddenly just has this natural home at BICAR, right? We just, for the last several months that we've been talking, it's just this natural alliance of the way we think about academia and art and all kinds of things. So it's just an absolute pleasure to be here, and I thank you, for everything you taught me as well about thinking about what contemporary theory can do, and how to have this kind of living practice of what criticality is all about. So I mean, that's just taught me a huge amount as well, and I thank you for that as well.
It's my pleasure, really.
Yeah.
And you'll see, and we'll all see, I hope, with the new department and just tons of cross fertilization, like that, it's just a different mode of thinking, that I think you saw with Rico today. So I really thank you for that, Rico, which is very generous. It's not intimidating. It's not like, none of us want to at BICAR want to intimidate anyone. We just, there are no camps, there's nothing. We just, we want to bear everything out. So, and I think, I thank you for that presentation, because you really demonstrated, and I couldn't have thought of a better person to sort of to lead this new department. So thank you, Rico, and thank you all for coming. We're 45 minutes over, I know, but they're 40 minutes over. And
I knew that would happen. I knew that would happen.
Well, thank you as well for that, Rico. But we'll see you soon, and we'll see you all soon, I hope, with BICAR. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Hope to see you soon.
Okay. Good night.
Night. Bye.